Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Jessica, and on behalf of the Alumni Advancement Office, I would like to welcome you to our talk, Secrets from the Science of Toddlers for a Happier Life. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the land on which this webinar is taking place, McMaster University. It is on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Our talk today is part of our Rejuvenate series, which is being sponsored by our affinity partner, TD Insurance. So I'd like to thank them for their commitment to our programming. Just a reminder, for every Rejuvenate webinar you attend, you'll be entered into a random draw for a chance to win one of 3 gift cards for MEC, Terra Greenhouses, or Lee Valley. Winners will be contacted the week of May 6th. This talk is being recorded, and you will receive a link in an email that will be sent out later on this evening. And feel free to share this link to this talk with friends and family. That email also contains a quick survey that'll help us understand how you enjoyed this presentation. I'd like to thank everyone who pre-submitted a question during the registration process. If you have a question for our speaker during the presentation, please use the question button below and type it in. We will have some time at the end of the formal presentation to answer a few. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Hasan Merali is an associate professor in the Department of Pediatrics at McMaster University and a pediatric emergency medicine physician at McMaster Children's Hospital. He received his medical degree from Harvard Medical School and Master of Public Health degree from Johns Hopkins University. His research focuses on child injury prevention in low and middle income countries. He has published more than 25 peer-reviewed journal articles, and his writing has been featured in Science, the Boston Globe, NBC, CBC, and Popular Science. Dr. Merali lives in Oakville with his wife and their toddler daughter. During this talk, Dr. Merali will discuss how studies in child psychology and development, along with his own experiences as a pediatrician and parent, inspired him to write his recently released book, Sleep Well, Take Risk, Squish the Peas, Secrets from the Science of Toddlers for a Happier, More Successful Way of Life. I should also note, for those of you who turned in this evening, your name will be placed into a draw to win one of 10 of Dr. Merali's new books, and winners will be contacted via email. So without further delay, please welcome Dr. Hasan Merali as he discusses why and which toddler traits adults should emulate to lead a happier life. Dr. Merali?
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. I'm just going to load these slides. Okay, well, let's get started. I'm happy to be here at the McMaster alumni event. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been working on it for about 3 years now. It's exciting that the book just came out in March. And, over the years, I've been in pediatrics for about 14 years now. And during this time, I've been very privileged to work with young people. And some of the most special experiences I've had are with the youngest people that I work with, kind of this toddler, preschooler age range. And I use toddlers a little bit broadly here. But what I'm really talking about is toddlers and preschoolers. And so age 1 to 3 is toddlers and 3 to 5 is preschoolers. And during my time in pediatrics, there have been all these moments that have really inspired me to read more and think about them more. I practice pediatric emergency medicine at McMaster Children's Hospital. And one example is I see a lot of these little kids coming in with fractures and cuts. And this made me think about how they are just the best risk takers. And as I got more into the data about how they behave and kind of mapped this onto the adult data, it really became a whole book eventually, because there's so many things I think we can learn from them. And I don't have time to go through them all today, but I'm going to highlight a few of the more important ones, I think, and hopefully leave you with some takeaways about how I think acting like a toddler is actually really good for us. So I'm an academic. I always have to have a disclosure slide. You already know this. We've talked about it in the intro, but a lot of this talk is based on my new book, Sleep Well, Take Risks, Squish the Peas. And so let's start with this term, a term that I don't like at all, terrible twos. It comes up a lot. And anytime people think of 2-year-olds or toddlers, this term comes up. They think about tantrums, and we'll get into that. But really, what I want to do is dispel some of the myths about them as well. When I started writing this book, I thought, these are really wonderful people. I'm gonna write this book and really get into it. And I spent a year going through just the data around them. And what I've come out with is that I think they're actually the best people in society. The way they act, their goals, which is really all about learning and relationship building, is quite amazing. And so I think we need to get rid of this term. It's one of my lifelong goals and replace it with terrific twos because that's who they really are. And, every age group is one, teenager is another one I hear a lot, which I think we should get rid of. But yeah, I'll talk a little bit about this in more detail. And, I think that's part of this. We can learn a lot from them, but a lot of what we think about them are just simply untrue. And so a couple of objectives just to ground us for this talk. And so I just talked about this. So I want to really describe how I think toddlers and preschoolers are among the best people in our society. We're going to get into a little bit more detail about some of the lessons we can learn from them, because what I really want to do is make this practical for you. And then we'll just kind of end with a unique pairing, which I think is very special, and that's toddlers and preschoolers and seniors. And we'll talk a little bit about intergenerational care and some of the data around that and how good it is for both parties to be involved in that. Okay, so we have to get tantrums out of the way because every time I talk about how wonderful toddlers are, that is the very first question. What about tantrums? And understandably, when you're walking through the grocery store, that's when you're going to notice them. You see this 2 or 3-year-old just absolutely losing it because they weren't able to hold a carrot for some reason. And they get a lot of attention at that time because they're loud, they're dramatic. And what I want us to get past is really something about how tantrums really present, but also just focus on the rest of their time. And so on average, tantrums are one time per day. The median duration is 3 minutes. So that means half of them are less than that. Half of them are more. It would be unusual to get to 10 minutes, 15 at the very most, but that would be very, very unusual. And the most common is half to 1 minute. And the other thing I think we need to keep in mind is this is part of normal development. So how do they spend the rest of their time? They're actually awake for 12 to 13 hours a day. And let's take an extreme case of 10 minutes of tantrum. So what are they doing for those other 12 hours a day? And I think that's where if we can focus our time and attention, really we get all the wonderful lessons. And as I went through everything, writing this book, what really came out and what kind of everything feeds into, and we'll get into this a little bit, is learning and building relationships. This is what grounds these little people in everything they do. And I think what makes them so special and why they're so good at so many different things, because that's what they want to accomplish all of the time, is learning and building relationships. And so this is a meme that came out several years ago. Some of you might remember it. There's one for every profession. So if you haven't seen the one for your own profession, I recommend that you try to find it. They're quite funny. But I think it's important because it's talking about how different people see us, including ourselves, including our parents, including society, and then how that's actually quite different than what we really do. And so this is a fun one for doctors and what I think I do and thinking a lot, and I end up doing a lot of paperwork, and my mom thinks I do something very different. Um, so so that's the first point I think is that, you know, we perceive toddlers in a certain way, but what they actually do, if we look at the data and really go deeper into that, is something very different. And so I've made this one for toddlers. And so on the left, you'll see what society thinks I do, tantrums, getting angry, crying. But here's what I actually do. This is how I'm spending most of the 12 to 13 hours I'm awake. They're doing a lot of exercise. They're eating actually quite well. They share. They're extremely kind people. They spend a lot of their time laughing, much more than us. They have an intense drive to read, and we'll get into that, much better than us. They like to play, as we all know, again, much better than the rest of us. They really enjoy working in teams. And we're not going to talk about it today, but I have a whole chapter in my book about how I really think they're the best people at working in teams because they're so process focused rather than goal focused like the rest of us. They talk to themselves a lot, and we're going to talk about that specifically. One thing, actually, they have a very, I think, good reputation for is saying no. And I don't think there's anyone better than a toddler at saying no. And we kind of lose that along the way. But that's something I think they're very good at, and we actually need to get back to a little bit. And like I talked about with my experiences in the ER, every single shift, they take risks better than anybody. And so I have three that we're going to talk about today before we get into intergenerational care. And so the first is reading. They read like nobody else. Self-talk, fascinating research on how they talk to themselves mostly out loud, but more importantly, how that can really help us if we start talking to ourselves. And it doesn't have to be out loud. And then play. And all the data around play, that's how it helps them. But also, if we were to play more, how that can help us with decreasing stress, creativity, and we'll get more into that. Okay, so I'm going to start here. This is 14 years ago for me. This is the beginning of my pediatrics training. This is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I did my pediatrics residency here. This is the Windsor Street Clinic. And what's nice about the US, and one thing I miss, is that at every well child visit, there's a wonderful charity called Reach Out and Read, and they provide books for all children. And so every single visit from 0 to 5 years old, little kids get a book. And I was just always amazed by how excited these little kids would be at the end of their visit and coming to see their pediatrician, which is usually not a fun experience because almost all these visits involve some shots. But they would be happy because they would get to read a book and they would just race down the hall. They would end up in the book closet and, complete awe, staring at all these books and really all the learning and adventures they would have from these books. And so I think that's really special, that drive to learn and experience things through books. And if we were able to do that a bit more, it's actually quite good for us. And we'll get into that as well. So this book, in case you don't recognize it, it's called Brown Bear, What Do You See? And this is my daughter's favorite book. She's 3 now. And so we just coming up to the end of the toddler years. She's going to be 4 pretty soon. And this is her absolute favorite book. And what I like about this photo, this looks like our copy as well, is that it's broken. And these are strong books. They're much stronger than the ones adults read because they're board books. But still, toddlers have such a huge appetite to read. They can actually wear out their books. And how many of us can say that we wear out our books because we've read them too much? And I kid you not, I wrote this down at the time she said it. This is her first full sentence. I want to read a book. And so, just taking a step back, toddlers are not actually reading by the strict definition. But I think their love of books is something that we can learn a lot from because they make books part of their lives. Between the ages of 1 and 3 is a really special time when they discover their love of books. They start to build their own little libraries, and my little one has her own little library there. They know the names of their books. They decide on a favorite book and request to read it repeatedly. And they also learn how to turn pages themselves. They can answer some questions about the books. And as you're going through the book, they can actually, finish the sentences because they love repetition with books as well. And then at age 3, they're just ready to do everything themselves. They explore books independently. They'll just go and pick it up and start flipping through it. They'll start imitating the action of reading a book, start saying what they remember out loud. Age 4 is when they start to understand how books are read, left, right, top to bottom. They start to learn their alphabet so they can pick out letters, and they can start retelling the stories as well. And so, these are the textbook definitions of the developmental stages that kids go through with reading. But really, the point is, and what you'll see all little kids do, is just try to get any adult around them to read them a book. And so this is some Canadian data. We can't measure the under five, so we're going to start at age 6 to 8, kind of when kids start to read. And this is the percentage of children who are frequent readers, so 5 to 7 days per week. And this is up to adulthood, so up to the age of 17. And you can see it starts off pretty high at 50% and then drops off 37, 24, 25. And it actually kind of stays like that in our adult lives. And it's not until we're seniors that this starts to go up again. And what's not here is the under five because we can't, like I said, measure reading. But if it was there, I have no doubt that it would be 100%. And the other sad thing is that not only do we read less for pleasure as we get older, over time, the same thing has happened to us for whatever reason. And we're reading less. And so this is the percent of reading for personal interest on a typical day. This is American data, but it's largely applicable to a lot of high income countries. And so what we can see is this is 2003 to 2017. You can see for adults, like I talked about, the highest level of reading overall is the 65 plus age range. But if you look at that one, it's the most clear. Like from 2003 to 2017, what a drop there was in the people who read for personal interest. And it's almost the same for every other age category. So I think this is really one place where we need to focus on and take that lesson from little people. And we'll talk more about why, as to why reading is so important. And so let's start with some of the benefits for kids, and then we'll get to some of the benefits for adults. I'm not going to review all the studies in detail, but I'll just try to highlight the most important points. And so the first point is, why are young children reading? What do they really want to get out of books? And so for this study, there were 48 3 and 4-year-olds who were asked to read one of two different animal books. The books were very, very similar in terms of length, pictures, etc. The first one, what do you want to do when something wants to eat you, contained information specifically on how an animal's body part was important for survival. While the second book, Biggest, Strongest, Fastest, just contained factual descriptions. And so the kids were read these books. They were asked questions on comprehension and preferences. And interestingly, they performed similarly on comprehension, high level of enthusiasm, no matter what it is, because that's just where they live with books, high level of enthusiasm. But for preferences, they prefer the one with explanations. I think this really goes to what they're after. They're really after the knowledge that books can provide them. Another interesting thing that books can help with is willpower. And so we know willpower is incredibly important for our entire lives. So I'll start with why that's important. This beautiful location on the left is Dunedin, New Zealand. And they have a health study that started in 1972 with 1,000 children. And they had regular follow-up all throughout their childhood into adulthood. And one of the things they were able to test little kids for as they grew up was self-control. And then they measured the data on these adults now at age 32. So that's how many years of data they had. And after they controlled for as many factors as they possibly could, and this is a very robust data set, they found that self-control, the kids who had self-control when they were younger, that was a predictor of better health, more wealth, and decreased criminal activity. So fascinating. So how important shows the importance of self-control. And so now let's talk about reading and self-control in this next study. This is from the University of Pennsylvania and Stanford. And I love this study because it involves gummy bears, which I like to eat as well. So this is 86 children. They were read one of two versions of a book. It's the same book, just the words were changed a little bit to convey two different ideas. So in one book, the character conveyed the idea that having this uh, willpower was energizing. And the other version of the book didn't convey that idea. The character in the book had willpower, but it wasn't energizing. And so they read the kids the books. They left them in an experimental room, and there was two piles on the table. One had two gummy bears, one had three gummy bears, and then there was a bell. They were told if they rang the bell, they could eat the two gummy bears right away. But if they were able to wait, then they would get three gummy bears. And what was fascinating is that the kids who read the book where the character themselves was energized by willpower, they did some very interesting and cute things. So they were able to wait longer, first of all, 3.5 minutes longer, and they developed their own self-control strategies. So they would look away from the treat and cover their eyes. And I think this just speaks to the power of books for little kids and, for us as well. And so another interesting thing that books can do, and I like this study too, because we talk about how they hate vegetables, and that's largely true for everybody, not just toddlers. Adults by far don't meet their the intake recommended for vegetables as well. But what this study did is it took 127 2-year-olds, and the parents were asked not only what vegetable does your child not like, what is the vegetable that they refuse to eat? And so the parents gave the answer for that. And then they got a book. So the researchers made a book around this vegetable. And the kids were read this book every day for 2 weeks. And then after the 2 weeks, they had them eat the vegetable every night. And these kids were actually followed for quite a bit of time, for 3 months out. And they found that those who, read the book about the vegetable preferred it and actually ate more of it at the 3-month mark. Okay, so we've established how important reading is for little kids and the power of reading. We talked about a little bit about some of the things that reading can do for them. And let's go into the studies for adults now. And so really, I think the benefits of reading and what I want you to take away and what I hope to encourage you to do is get into that habit of daily reading is because reading can protect us against dementia. And so the American Academy of Neurology estimates that by age 60, about 1 in 20 to 1 in 10 people have MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment. And then by age 80, it's 1 in every 4 people. And then people with MCI have a higher risk of progressing to dementia. So I think whatever we can do to protect ourselves from that is important. And reading is one of those things because it provides some brain exercise, if you can think of it like that. And so two very important studies to just show the benefits of reading for adults. So the first one is from Taiwan. This had 2,000 older adults followed for 14 years. So incredibly long study with a large number of participants. And they got a lot of data from them at baseline. And this included how much they read. And they found that over the long term, those adults who read at least once a week reduced their risk of cognitive decline, so getting to MCI and dementia. And this was true no matter their educational level, because we know that's an important piece too. And what the researchers found was that other cognitively stimulating activities like reading, puzzles, for example, are important. And this is the type of brain exercise that we need to be doing. The next study, very fascinating also. This is from the Yale School of Public Health. 3,500 participants over 50, and they analyzed survey data sets. And what they wanted to do really is tease out not only reading, but tease out the difference between books, newspapers, and magazines. And again, a huge follow-up here. They had a 12-year follow-up. And this is amazing. So the researchers found an incredible 20% reduction in the risk of death for people who read books compared to those who didn't read at all. And then a couple of other fascinating points to this study, which really, gets to the importance of reading. So there was a dose-response relationship. These are correlations, but we want to get to causality. What is really causing this? And one of those things is dose response. So the more you do something, the more it protects you. And so they did actually find that the people who read books more had a lower risk of dying. The next was that books were more important than newspapers or magazines, but still important to be reading if that's what you're able to do. And this effect persisted. It didn't matter for different genders, different education levels, different levels of wealth, because we know that wealthier people live longer as well. Mental health factors like depression, any other important factors they could think of, reading was the one thing that reduced their risk of death. And I really like the final line in this study. They write, these findings suggest that the benefits of reading books include a longer life in which to read them. And so, one of the things that's important because we need to be reading every day. But one of the things that happens or has happened as screens and technology have become a bigger part of our lives, and we all know this, is that we now skim read. And a lot of this work has been done by Marianne Wolf. If you're interested, I highly recommend reading some of her stuff. And, this is one of the titles of her article, Skim Reading is the New Normal. The effect on society is profound. And I think there's another really important lesson here from toddlers and preschoolers about how they read. They are not skimming by any means. If you ever sit down with a little kid and they want to read a book, as they always do, it's a very different type of experience. First, it takes much longer, of course, than it would for you to simply read that book and how we normally would. They'll get a couple of pages in, they ask questions, they have to touch the pictures, they have to touch the words. They flip back a couple of pages, make the connections between what happened before, more questions, how that's connected to what you're currently on. And you finally get to the end of this book with all of these questions and connections that they've made. And the first thing they ask is again. And I just love that about my daughter and going through books with her because she really wants to understand this story as well as she can. And I think that's something we lose, and the data is here, is that what's called deep reading, what all toddlers do, is really important. And, you know, Dr. Wolf has been really good at studying this, and she has a couple of really good points of how we can get to deep reading. And so these are just a couple of tips. So we talked about trying to read every day, if possible. And then the other suggestion is to do deep reading. And so if you can, and a lot of people just read electronic books, and that's totally fine, as long as there's no other distractions, they're actually an e-reader, then that's fantastic. But if you can, physical books are fantastic. You want to eliminate all distractions. So, cell phone in a different room, ideally. And then I think what's really important is that when people read, they, want to read a chapter, they would try to get this amount of time. But really, a time goal is more important. It doesn't matter how far you get in the book, and you're probably going to read less books overall, but getting that deep reading and getting a deeper cognitive, stimulation that you really want is important. So setting a time, and she recommends somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes. And then, building that habit, being consistent is really important. So, that's the first toddler habit. I spend a little bit more time on that because I think it's so important and they're so good at it. So they just love to read. They read every day. They do deep reading. And I think we can, if we were able to do that, like I talked about, this is the one thing that we know protects against dementia. Among other things, of course, we learn a lot more. And if we're reading fiction, then we can be more empathetic with characters that are like that. So a lot of other advantages as well. Okay, so this is one of my favorite ones, and it's called Self-Talk. And let me just play this clip for you. Gonna make sure I'm sharing my sound, and then we'll talk about it in a second.
Let's go, Dad. Let's get up and go in that secret path. Oh, yes, ready, Dad. Someone's in our secret path. This way. You'll slip. I won't fall. Maybe I will. That's okay, 'cause we all fall. Have fun, Dad. Well, let's go down this big old hill. Wee woo! Wee woo! Wee woo! Woo!
Hey, what kind of dinosaur are you?
Countersaurus! I'm a Stegosaurus.
I just love that clip. I'm sure you're all smiling right now for so many reasons. This is Auburn Sage. She lives in Washington State with her family, and as you can see, she's a pro snowboarder. She has the best outfit that you could possibly wear while snowboarding. And her dad just noticed that she liked to talk to herself, so he put a little mic on her and followed her down this hill. And incredible how she guides herself through it, even before all the questioning at the end. So let's talk about that because it's a really important thing that young children do. And we naturally lose this, but we can actually harness the power of self-talk and improve our lives in that way.
Let's go, Dad.
So we don't actively think about it very much, but we all talk to ourselves in some way. Sometimes we actually do it to help ourselves, give ourselves a boost of motivation. And sometimes we have a lot of negative self-talk. We get angry with ourselves, and it's hard, but we can really change that if we think about what we're doing and change some of the language we use. And I'll talk about that. So this is a preschool, very similar to the one I drop my daughter off every day at. And what I like about walking down the halls of preschool, besides all the laughing and cheering and encouragement I hear as I pass each classroom, is what kids are doing by themselves. And so, at that time, this was like last winter, I was watching little Julie, and Julie was getting her mitts on. And, as she's getting her mitts on, she's saying, Julie can do it, and really encouraging herself about what the task is that she needs to do. And then a couple of steps down, there's little Colton. And Colton's looking down at his shoes, and he put his shoes on backwards, a very common thing that happens in preschools. And he just says out loud, Colton made a mistake. No judgment, just calling it out what it is out loud. And they don't care who hears them and how other people feel about them. And I think that's wonderful because it really helps them correct their mistakes. And so what that's called and what toddlers and preschoolers are doing is called private speech. And it's called private speech, but it's actually out loud. Toddlers say their first word around the age of 1. And then after they start talking with others, it quickly turns into self-talk. And this is directed at themselves. Sometimes it's comprehensible, sometimes it's not. It peaks around the age of 4 to 6, and then it becomes mumbling, mutters until it becomes completely silent. And that's what we have. We have what's called inner speech, which is silent. And so let's go through a little bit about how self-talk helps little kids. And so this is a study from the University of Queensland. It was in 2021. And what they did is they took 71 3 to 5-year-olds and they had them build either a house or a garden using Lego sets. And what was fun, just like we watched in the video, is that they recorded them while they were doing this. And so, interestingly, a lot of the little kids would plan what they were going to do out loud. And then they would say things to motivate themselves. Okay, I've got this. They would talk about their own performance. I'm not getting this right. And then they would sometimes reflect on what they just did. Hooray, I did it, or I can't do it. And of course, with all little kids, there was a lot of irrelevant speech, just like what happens in our heads. And so there was a lot of choo, choo, choo recorded when they were building a house or garden. And so they analyzed all the speech that the little kids had, and they found that 100% of them used private speech in some way or another. And they talked to themselves a lot. By far, the most common use was performance feedback. And on average, they said something to themselves related to how they were executing a task more than 2 times per minute. And some of them were up more than 7 times a minute. And when the words were compared to the accuracy of what they had built, they found that those who actually verbalized their plan out loud did better in building what they were supposed to build. And so let's talk about how this amazing trait that all toddlers and preschoolers have of self-talk, how it can help us. And so I'll start with one of just an interesting study. This is from a smaller adult study, 26 adults. They're asked to find this red chair in a sea of distracting images. and they're timed about how fast they can find the image. And half of them are asked to say the word chair out loud, and the other half are just asked to do it how they normally would. And interestingly, the people who say chair out loud were better at finding the chair. And that's just one quote from the study itself. It actually made their visual systems a better chair detector. And the same is true for sports. And so there's a different study where people are doing free throws in basketball. One group is told to say relax out loud, one group is told to say faster, and one group is just told to shoot as they normally would. And the group that says relax before shooting scores more shots. And the ones that say faster actually score the least. And the ones that say nothing are in between. And so we can actually use this self-talk for a wide variety of scenarios in our lives to improve how we react to things and how we can find things, how we perform in sports, all kinds of different ways. One book recommendation I have, and where I got a lot of the data I'm going to talk about next, is from a book called Chatter. It's by Ethan Kross. I love the subtitle, explains it perfectly. The voice in our head, why it matters, and how to harness it. And what Dr. Cross really gets at is how adults can use this self-talk method is really by referring to ourselves in the second and third person. And so the first study, I won't go through it in too much detail, but just know that they had adults, they use fMRI, so brain imaging, and then what are called event-related potentials. Those are the little squiggly lines, and those are brain waves. And they put the participants in the MRI scanners, and they showed them aversive images. So these are from a standardized database. So something like a fierce dog bearing down to elicit fear. And they ask the participants to talk to themselves in two different ways. What am I feeling right now? Or what is, in the third person, your name? What is Hasan feeling right now? And they measured the brainwave responses. And interestingly, they found reduced emotional reactivity in the people that talk to themselves in third person. And they repeated this experiment with people thinking about negative things that happened to them in their past, like a lot of us end up doing. And they found the same thing, less emotional reactivity if we talk to ourselves in third person. One of the best suggestions I got from this book too, because a lot of the end of our day is spent thinking about what went wrong during the day. And Dr. Cross has a great suggestion where instead of talking to yourself negatively, you really need to talk to yourself as if you're talking to a friend. So really just changing that perspective, and the way you talk to yourself will actually, dramatically improve, because a lot of things you say to yourself, you would never say to a friend. And so talking to yourself in that way can really help, because at nighttime it's usually the worst, because that can interrupt our sleep, which is another important foundation for wellness. So we really need to make sure that it's not interrupting our sleep. And then this was a larger study, and I like this one because it didn't involve the fMRI or the brain waves. This is real life scenarios. And so they were looking at social stresses, things we go through on a daily basis, meeting new people that makes us nervous, public speaking. They had 600 adults, and they did 7 different studies. And what they were comparing, again, is using first person versus second and third person. And, they found these small shifts in language influenced a person's ability to regulate their thoughts, their feelings, and their behavior. And so I think that's really the important message here, is that, this is something that toddlers do all of the time. It helps them regulate their emotions. It helps them improve their task performance. And for us, we can really adapt that. And we don't have to do it out loud. This can still be inner speech, but we need to be intentional about it. And we need to really focus on referring to ourselves in the second and third person. And then the last one I want to talk about, because it's something that little kids do so well, is playing. Um, Play is so special for little kids because they integrate it into everything they do. They do it when they're eating, they do it when they're walking. Pretty much everything they do integrates play. Exercise, same thing. And so we know play in children has a lot of benefits. It improves math skills, language, social development, your relationships. and physical development. And they don't need to be told to play more because that's what they do. But we do. And so, what can play do for us? And so, I guess one of the reasons we need to think about why we don't play as much is, our brains go through a lot of different transitions as we age. And one of them is a more developed prefrontal cortex. So we're planning a lot more. And so we're thinking about the objectives of certain activities, what needs to be done in that amount of time. And that's, I think, really one of the first things that we need to let go of. Every activity does not need an objective. And if we're able to get to that, then I think we can play more. And then play is really something that has to be enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable, then it's not play. And there also has to be active engagement. So, things like watching TV do not count as play. And what's interesting about play when it's been studied in adults is how much it can help us decrease stress. So, adult playfulness is correlated with happiness and life satisfaction. And not only are more playful adults not only self-rated, but rated by others, less stress, they also react in a less stressed way when there's objectively stressful situations. So there's all of these studies done around the COVID-19 pandemic when that started. And they found that people who identified as playful, involved in playful activities, who their partners or friends identified as playful, they felt they could manage their stress better and objectively felt less stressed than others. And besides decreased stress, the other reason, and young children are so good at this because they have amazing imaginations, is that if we were to play more, we can actually be a bit more creative. And so, any aunt, uncle, grandparent can tell you often the best part of receiving a gift for a toddler is the box it comes in. So the toy is interesting, it has flashy lights, make noises, but it's kind of limited. But a box is really anything to them. It's a 3D mural for their paint set. It's a castle. It's a rocket ship for squirrels, anything they want it to be. And, the same is true for adults. And I just want to touch on this because play is so powerful for creativity. And a lot of the studies that have been done are really in the workplace. So this is a study from Sweden, 17 different meeting groups, so all different types of industries. And in these meeting groups, all the researchers did was come in halfway through the meeting when people were taking a break and put one of two groups of things on the table. So one group got a bowl of fruit and some dark chocolate, and the other group got one of four fun items. And those included things like a stick-on mustache, foam dart guns, a game that said anytime someone touched their face, everyone would raise their hands and say, "Life is wonderful." And that's all they did was put these items on the table. And at the end of the meeting, they had both the participants and the people who were observing rate the meetings. And they found that there was an increase in collaboration, openness to new ideas, and higher productivity. So imagine what an easy change this is to make our day a little bit more fun. And this is the last study I want to talk about in this because I think it maybe is the most practical for us to start doing and to have a little bit more play. And so this is a study with undergraduate students. This is at North Dakota State University. They were given a hypothetical scenario. They said, imagine you have a day off and you need to plan what you're going to do and write this down. And the only difference between the two groups that they told this to is that the second group, they said, think as if you were a child. And the differences were stark. The first group, thinking as they normally would, they said they would check email, they would clean, they would maybe check in with their job, and a lot of obligations. And the second group that was thinking as a child, visited a pet store, went to their grandmother's house to play cards, and all of them said they would go play with their friends at some point. So I hope that this is a very simple exercise that you might want to try next time you have half hour, anytime on the weekend, you're trying to plan what you're going to do. Hopefully you have some free time. Instead of thinking about yourself, like what you would do, think about childhood you, what they would do, and actually do that activity. And hopefully that will bring some more play into your life. I wanted to end on intergenerational care because the bond between little kids and seniors is just, it's special. It's something that can't be replicated. And if you've never watched this show, please find it on YouTube. Old People's Home for 4-year-olds. There's a British version and an Australian version, which makes it even cuter with these little kids and their accents. But it's amazing about what co-locating a senior's home and a preschool can really do. And so this is just one study that looked at this, and this is from Japan, where they have a lot of intergenerational care settings. And the title of this says it all. I'll go through it briefly, but interactive programs with preschool children bring smiles and conversations to older adults. And so they had older adults and they had little kids come in. One was performance based, so they would do a little show for them, and the other group would go in and talk to everyone and have conversations with the seniors. And I like this study because they rated the smiles of everyone. So 1, 2, or 3, smiling with change in mouth angle, smiling with their mouth open, indicating joy, and then the third was laughter with vocalization. And what they found was that in the social oriented sessions where people were talking to each other, people were smiling more. The visual attention was higher in the social based programs. And, really what this did is help the older people reintegrate into society. So that's one tiny study. I'll just tell you about the biggest study. So this is a review of 27 different studies, what's called a meta-analysis. Most studies agree on the positive effect of psychosocial well-being. There's improved reported self-health, decreased stress and depressive mood, and an increased sense of community. And I think if any one of you has ever been around a young child, you know that they make you laugh, they make you get up and move, they make you play, and they make you read, and all these things that make our lives better. And so I'll just end with a couple of quotes because I love them so much. This is an intergenerational community. It's called Belong. It's in Chester, UK. It's a fully integrated center for elderly mixed with a daycare, 2 and 3-year-olds, and has 25 children. And so the kids and the adults do everything together. They eat together, they play together, all their activities. This is Ian. He's 84. The integration here between the sick, elderly people, the infirm, the children is the full works. We are all here together. This is what life is about. This next one is from Alan. He's 82. His wife has Alzheimer's, and this is what he had to say. If she's not having a good day, I bring her down to the nursery, and it's as if someone has turned her switch back on. It's that powerful. And that's really what I want to leave you with. Young children are powerful. They do things right in a lot of different ways. If we were to act like them, our lives would be better. And just being around them really has a profound positive effect on the rest of us. So I want to thank you for joining me today. This is my new book. I go through a lot of other lessons that I've learned about. I'm always learning more and wanting to write more and share more. So if you have stories of young children or any children that are in your life or that you've encountered at the grocery store or out in public, please connect with me. I'm on X and LinkedIn and Facebook, and my website is just my name, hasanmerali.com. Thank you all for joining, and we'll take some questions.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. So just a reminder for all of our viewers, if you do have a question, you can type it in using the question button. I believe it's under the video portion on your website. I have a few here we can start off with. The first question I had from one of our viewers, how can I encourage my spouse to be more spontaneous and have more fun rather than focusing on chores at home? You had mentioned about writing down a plan and then, thinking as a child while you're writing down that plan. Is that something you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard because, I live on my calendar as well. But, one of the things that we need to be doing more is just planning out white space. And it's a little ironic, but there needs to be places where we don't have anything planned. And I think once you can get there and once you can have those moments, and it doesn't have to be a lot to start with, then I think really, getting the fun part in there is important. And, if you're lucky enough to have a kid in your life, not necessarily your own, but any kid, I mean, ask them what they would do and go do that. Like they only think of fun things. They're not going to tell you that they want to, spend some time on email and catching up on email. They'll tell you fun things. But, these reminders of your own childhood, is powerful. And I talk about how wonderful these people are, but I hope everyone can remember that that was all of you at one point. That might have been 30 years ago, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, but you were those people and that person is still there. And so trying to tap into that and thinking about what young you would do and trying to get those memories and good memories of what you were doing and trying to get back into those things, I think is helpful.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. One of our viewers said, fantastic talk. Thank you. Scandinavian countries are always ranked as having happier citizens. Is it possible they have tapped into being more childlike? Any research that suggests why they might be happier?
Yeah, one of the things that I saw when I was looking at this, particularly with little kids, is they have more outdoor time. And so, part of their culture is spending time outside for their kids, and it's not as many rules and not as much structure. Like they're just allowed to explore, and that's part of it. And we know most kids, will take those risks, and the injuries they get are fairly minor. And people like me are there to fix those things if they happen. And so, how that translates to us, I think, is a Japanese term called forest bathing. And there's all of this good data that just spending time outdoors, and it doesn't have to be any strenuous activities. It can just be simply walking. And even if we're able to do that in our workday when we're taking breaks, like that is the ideal thing to do, is if you have a break in your workday, is to be outside more. And I think that's what they really tap into from a very young age, and it carries forward through the rest of their lives, as well as, of course, all the wonderful social programs they have. But really, when I was looking at this from the child and adult perspective, the time spent outdoors.
I think I lost you there for a second, but I think we're back. So I will move to the next question I see here. It says, I am retired. I've been trying to learn how to juggle so I can perform for others as a volunteer. It is very difficult. I am discouraged and my practice time declines. Hearing you, it occurs to me that I am looking at this as work, something I have to do. Based on your comments, could my problem be that I am looking at it as work and I should be looking at it as a low level play?
I think that's helpful to do that perspective change. I think that I just want to mention because I just did it. I recorded an episode for the Retirement Wisdom podcast because I think there is so much for retirees. So if you're interested, that just came out last week. But yeah, I think there is a lot of good data around volunteering. So good for you for doing that. It does not have to be the formal volunteering. So I think what happens with a lot of people is that we get into these obligations. And I think that's what you're getting at too. And that's what formal volunteering can really have happened to us. And so I think although that's wonderful and it will improve your life, same with donating money, the same effect can be had with simple acts of kindness. So if you just want to do one-off things and not have that structured thing every day or week in your calendar, I think that's a nice way to mix it up. And it might just be the thing you're doing as well. It might just be something else you need to be doing. And I've heard from a lot of people very funny. I love it though from retirees because spending time with little kids is so powerful for retirees. They actually volunteer or just get paid babysitting jobs. And they do this not because they need the money, but because being around a little kid when you're retired, because those two people have life figured out, I think, better. Like we talked about, the reading goes down, but then it comes up in retirement. Laughter does kind of the same thing. All of these things, there's that special connection. So I think anything you can do to be around young children will just also give that boost.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Just touching on the laughter that you just mentioned, I have a comment here from someone. I find the older I get, the less laughter is in my life. Do you have any ideas to help improve this?
It's hard because laughter is so important. I also have a whole chapter on this because it's critical, and it's one of these things again that we drop off as we get older. There is something funny for everyone, I guarantee it. And it changes as you get older. I'm a new father, so for me, it's dad jokes right now. I love dad jokes. So I signed up about a year ago for dad jokes, and I get one every day emailed to me, and that makes me laugh a lot. And I listen to funny podcasts. It takes a little while to figure out who that comedian is, what show is really funny for you, but that thing does exist. And I talk about TV and not playing, but if there's a funny show that is totally worth your time doing, I'll also say, if you're really stuck, there is a thing called simulated laughter. I've written a whole article on it. If you can actually start making yourself laugh voluntarily, it actually has a lot of the same mental health benefits that spontaneous laughter does. And there are now organized activities, specifically laughter yoga and laughter meditation. So take a look at those programs. And the point of those things is to relax, but really just laugh with other people. And you probably know this, but laughter is contagious. So once you get involved in those, it's great. And as part of the email, maybe Jessica, I can just send around that article too.
Yeah, absolutely. We can include that. Okay, just going through here. When you're talking about books and reading more, one viewer writes, some books and stories are more difficult, emotional, and sad circumstances. Does the type of reading matter?
It does not. It does not. As long as you are into the story, the more you read, the better. And so I just would encourage people to read what they're most interested in. Whatever is going to keep you reading regularly, that's what you should be reading. There are benefits, of different types of reading, fiction versus non. I think they balance each other out. The time you spent reading, the time you spent doing deep reading is the most important part.
That's great. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe two more questions here. So I will ask, can you clarify about the use of third person in self-talk? So for lying in bed, would you say to yourself, she did this today, not I did this today, or would you assign a name to it?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is you say your own name. So you talk to yourself as if in third person. So I would say to myself, Hassan, I did this, Hassan was doing this, etc., etc. It can't, you just have to get away from the word I. You can use you as well. The data is pretty similar between second and third person. And I think also the frame shift of talking to yourself as a friend, if you're really getting into the negative talk, is really helpful too. But for self-talk, it's always second and third person, never using I. But yes, putting your name to it makes it very easy.
Okay, that's great here. I'm just looking at, I said two more, but I'll do two more now. Someone is sorry, I'm on the wrong page here. There we go. So you mentioned that kids take on more risk, and oftentimes those risks can result in broken bones. Our playgrounds and schoolyards have become so risk adverse that are we creating a whole swath of children who don't want to take risks and that are in fact helpful for development?
Oh, yes, it's a good point. Actually, the Canadian Pediatric Society just came out with a position statement saying just that. And there's all this good data is that, yes, we are making things too safe, and parents have higher anxiety around their kids getting hurt. And we need to do less of that. We need to let them take those risks. That's how they learn. That's why in that phase of development, one of the reasons they're so good at learning, and I talk about, this is one of their focus, and they're better at all of us at learning and developing. And the reason why they can do that is because they take more risks than everybody. They're going to learn, they're going to figure out. Of course, there are things that we absolutely know. We need to keep them safe. My research is in road safety. So we need seatbelts, we need car seats, we need to keep them away from pools. But yes, in a playground, like we need to just let them go. And back to the question about Scandinavian countries, like they just open up a forest area and they just let the kids go into the forest. Like they kind of know where they are, but they're not, having a play structure that they need to stay around. They need to just go into the forest and explore.
That's great. And a last question here for this evening. Do you have any additional examples of particularly successful intergenerational initiatives that could serve as a model for other communities? And what are the biggest obstacles we would need to overcome to achieve this vision?
Yeah, they're so sparse. I mean, there was just one in Toronto. I actually connected with them recently, and after COVID, it kind of shut them down. I think that was the only one in Canada. There's a couple in the UK, and there's a couple in Australia. But yeah, it's something that is so key, and we lost this just in the last 100 years. Like before this past century, like we used to have this informally all the time, and we've gotten to this point where we've really separated elderly people in a lot of different ways. And yeah, I think it's sad. I think that maybe the housing crisis is going to solve a little bit of that, where we're getting grandparents and their grandkids together. But there are a whole bunch of people that don't have grandkids that we need to get involved with toddlers. So there are a couple of charities they're working on it, even if there's some just visits. I think they're helpful, but I think we really need to have a whole mindset change of this is really helpful for everybody involved, and what can we do to encourage this?
Yeah, I'm thinking when I had my daughter's 15 now, but when she was younger, I used to take her to, it was called a Mother Goose program, and I would take her into a senior center and we would just sing songs, but it was great. And the seniors in the home loved it. And so more programming like that would be amazing. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking time out of your night to come and speak to our alumni group this evening. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. As a reminder, we have our final Rejuvenate talk tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. with McMaster alumna Kristen Hess. She's an interior designer who will help us with designing our homes in 2024. And as mentioned at the start of the webinar, this will be recorded. You'll receive an email with a link to the recording as well as a survey. If you could fill that out, it takes 2 seconds. We greatly appreciate the feedback. And I also mentioned 10 of our lucky viewers will be receiving a copy of Dr. Merali's book. So stay tuned to your emails for your hope you're one of the lucky draw winners, which we will do by the end of this week. So thank you again, Dr. Merali. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for tuning in, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good night.